Welcome to Resiliency in the Fire Service, and I have with me my guest, Ali Rothrock from Pennsylvania. So she is here joining us, and we're going to introduce her in a moment, but I wanted to tell a quick story as we started this, and that is how I met the great Ali Rothrock. She was sitting in my FDIC class, and I thought she was about 15, maybe 16, and I'm like, why is this teenager sitting in my class? I already have her fire department t-shirt on. I wasn't sure what was going on there. And I teach the class. It was a 4-hour class. And I thought I did a pretty decent job. And then this girl walks up and goes, okay, let me talk to you. And she is so excited and she's sharing her energy. And I'm thinking, who is this girl? And how does she know about all this stuff that we're talking about? This post-traumatic stress and post-traumatic growth and resiliency. And she didn't really share any of her story, but she shared with me she was with the volunteer fire department up in Pennsylvania. I don't even remember which city it was at the time because you've been a few different places, and I just was taking it all in. There's a lot of people talking, and I'm like, I'm very confused. It was very confusing who this young girl was. It looked like she was probably younger than my daughter at the time, and I'm going, I don't know what's going on. And we got to talking, and then you said, I'm gonna reach out to you, and I said, and I thought, oh, I'll help this girl. I'll help her because you said you like to teach. I'm like, I'll help her figure out how to present and teach. And little did I know that she was way better than I was already, and I found that out later as we started to talk. But she started to share with me some of her passion and her energy, and I just wanted to kind of have you start with kind of sharing a little bit about where that passion comes from, why you're so passionate, and then we're going to get into kind of your story and how that kind of feeds into what we're talking about today.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I started in the volunteer fire service when I was 16, found it out of the blue, and the passion that I found for firefighting was unlike anything I had ever experienced up, for those first 16 years of my life. And not only was I passionate about actually doing the job of firefighting and everything that comes with that, being an EMT, tech rescue, all those things, but I really found a love and a passion for talking to firefighters and providing trainings for firefighters on things that we don't normally train on. And those are some of the topics that, you and I have bonded over, Jeremy. So I think that passion, I found it the very first time I ever walked into a firehouse. And that passion has led me to many different places, both, being an active firefighter for 15 years, but then also, providing those trainings for the emergency services on things that we just don't normally train on.
But how old were you when you first got introduced to firefighting? Because you said, you said you've been doing this 15 years. You're 20 years old now, so I mean, you were really, really young.
Just turned 20. Yeah. No, I was 16. I was, a junior in high school. I'm not a legacy firefighter, so it's not like I was around fire trucks for my whole life. I knew what firefighting was based on what I saw on TV and movies, which we know is always super accurate.
Super accurate, 100%.
Yep. Mm-hmm. So I didn't really have much of an idea of what to expect, but it was like there was a piece of me out there floating in the world that I'd been looking for. And when I found firefighting, I found that missing piece.
So where were you at? What was you were up in Pennsylvania, right? When that happened?
Yep, yeah, in central Pennsylvania, just a really small little volunteer firehouse, which was just a couple blocks from from where I grew up, which is many of us that started in the volunteer fire service. We started, because the firehouse was like a stone's throw from where we grew up. And it was certainly the same for me.
And when I met you, it was a few years back, and you had started a company, which we're going to talk about here in a moment, On the Job and Off. And you had kind of said to me, hey, I'd like for you to teach for me. I'm like, okay, whatever. And I had no idea what On the Job and Off was. Kind of tell us a little bit about what that was, too, because that's going to get us into this conversation about resiliency, really, and where it comes from.
Absolutely. So I think the idea for On the Job and Off, I started the company officially in 2018, but I think I started forming that company on my very first fire call in 2005, because my very first fire call, I mean, most people, like, their first call is maybe an automatic alarm or there's a duck stuck somewhere. It's something very low drama. But for me, just the way that it happened, my very first fire call was a double fatal car accident with 2 children. And so, I mean, I'm on a fire engine. I don't even know what a fire engine is. I don't know what CPR is. I don't know anything about anything. And I'm watching these firefighters and everyone else that was there just in the middle of this highway try to save, you know, specifically this 5-year-old who, looking back, I think had already passed before we got there. And I remember, you know, it was snowing, it was cold. I'm just taking all of this in, seeing death like that for the first time. And I just wanted so badly to get back to the firehouse because I wanted someone to tell me what to do with this. What do we do with this? I was so sure that someone had, like, you know, the 3 things to do to deal with the memories of things like this. And when we got back to the firehouse, I watched these firefighters, you know, through their tears, just take their gear off and go home. And I was shocked at that, the lack of care, the lack of acknowledgement, the lack of validation for what everybody was feeling. And that really stuck with me. You know, some people assume that experience was significant because of the death and the trauma that I saw, but it wasn't that stuck with me. It was more the lack of care that those firefighters gave to themselves. And I just thought, we, you know, years later, learning everything that goes into firefighting, thinking like, we're so good at knowing what to do on the scene of a call. We can talk you through every single tool, every single bit of our fire engines or rescues or trucks, whatever, and take our tools apart and clean them and put them back together and do everything we need to do on scene. But that's where our training stops. Their training stopped when they walked back in the firehouse that night after that call. And so through a lot of other experiences that I had, I decided and was really passionate about providing training in a really accessible way, emotionally, logistically, financially accessible training that could be there in those moments where there is no other training.
Yeah, and you finally got to a point where I mentioned before that you're an amazing speaker, and I think that shows in the fact that you were asked to do a TED Talk. And I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but I know that I'd love for you to share some of the principles for that, because there's a screen grab basically that I have put up actually on the classes I teach. So if anybody's seen me teach, has seen you standing on a stage with that phrase, resiliency is an act of rebellion. And I think that phrase really captured me, because you and I talked multiple times. We've discussed where you've been, where you come from, where you're going, your vision, your goal. I've talked some things for you on mental health. We've talked about post-traumatic growth. We've talked about resiliency, but I'd never seen it phrased like that. Resiliency is an act of rebellion. And I thought, wow, an act of rebellion, that's a little much. And then I remember calling you afterwards and going, okay, I haven't listened to at the time I hadn't even listened to the TED Talk. I had just seen the picture and I went, talk to me about this. And I'd love for you to share whatever you'd like to from your TED Talk, but also kind of what that means and how you got there, and how we all, because I know it's helped me a ton, because I've found moments where I'm going, okay, I have to make a conscious effort to be resilient. It's not just going to happen.
That's right. And that's, I mean, resilience, the ability to be resilient, is a skill like anything else we have ever learned how to do. It's not like I am born with the ability to be resilient and other people aren't. I am only able to be resilient because I've been faced with that choice so many times. Either you figure out how to get back up, or you're gonna stay down here forever. So those are your choices. And so resiliency for me became like a habit where, you know, the more you do something, the easier it is to do that thing. And I think, you know, the concept of rebelling is something that has been a part of my fire service experience since day one, where I realized that there was a very specific stereotype in my first firehouse and in many firehouses that I was being asked to fit into, to step into that role simply because of my gender. It didn't matter who I was as a person. It didn't matter how I wanted to present myself or how I wanted to interact with people. There was this stereotype, and to fit into that stereotype would have meant abandoning myself, abandoning who I was, my principles, my morals, the way that I wanted to be out in the world. And so it felt like this little rebellion every time I would go to that firehouse and be who I was, not who other people wanted me to be. And that was a really, you know, it's one thing to put like resilience on a pillow and you can buy it in Target, and it's one thing to, you know, say that to people kind of as a platitude. But for me, resilience is this fierce decision that's an ongoing, it's an ongoing process throughout our lives. And I mean, I've been in the fire service for 15 years and I've seen every side of it, the very worst and the very best. But in all of that, I had to make a choice to rebel against the idea of who other people wanted me to be. And through those experiences, many of them were so traumatic that it significantly affected my mental health, my relationship with myself, my relationship with the world. And so it got to a point where I had to decide, am I going to fight for myself, for my life, for who I want to be after all of this trauma, or am I going to stay stuck here? And it felt very much like being sunk. Like I couldn't swim, I couldn't breathe. I was just sunk and I was stuck, and I had to make a choice. You know, the hardest bit of resilience was that first kick up of fighting for myself. And so every step of the way in my recovery journey and my process to get to where I am now, I was practicing resilience, and that felt like rebelling against mental health stigma, rebelling against the fact that if people say, if you have gone through X, Y, and Z, you won't ever be able to accomplish X, Y, and Z, rebelling against all of that. And I think that specific line also came from, like, when I'm working on certain projects, I have certain podcasts that I'll listen to, or certain like TV shows that I'll put on in the background just to kind of help me get in that mode of what I'm working on. And for whatever reason, when I was writing that TED Talk, I was watching, or at least had on in the background, the Hunger Games trilogy, or it's four movies, 3 books, whatever. And, you know, a big concept in that is the rebelling. And so that was in my brain. And then that line just kind of fit and became the tagline of the whole thing.
I love it. And I think that when you brought the Hunger Games up, I almost started laughing because I thought I can totally see that being that. It's funny how little pieces coming, because as I, you know, as I think about some of these things, whenever you talk about that, I always think of David Goggin, who talks. He's the one who was living with a seal. Yeah. And I know that there's some friends of mine who listen to his podcast. I haven't really gotten that involved in it, but I know that just the basic concept is when you reach your limit, you've got 40% left, or you've only reached 40% of your, or something along those lines. Yeah. And I remember every time I come to a point in my life, whether it's working out, which my wife encourages me to do more than I would like to do, or whether it's studying for a test, or whether it's doing something at the station or work. Whenever you get to that point, I'm always thinking about, well, it really truly is the same thing. It's an act of rebellion. It's going, everything in me wants to do this. Yep. I'm going to do the opposite. And I love what you said about the fitting into a mold, because I know even as a chaplain myself, the expectation of the fire service is I have to fit into a mold. I'm not allowed to have any fun. I'm not allowed to make any jokes. I'm not allowed to have any dark humor, because I know we all have that as a coping mechanism when we deal with death. And so if I make a comment, not anything necessarily even morally wrong, just something that it might be, that's a little insensitive. Well, I'm coping with it the same way you are. And just because I have a faith background that allows me to pray, allows me to seek other ways to cope, I can still have some dark humor that helps me as well. And I know I've been in the fire service 16 and a half years now, and people know me now, and so now the running joke is, well, the chaplain says that, kind of, you know, they chuckle. But the point is, you have to rebel against everything within, because even in regular fire service, those of you who are captains, lieutenants, you're not an officer, and you've been someone who decides you're going to be a lifelong firefighter, not take any promotional tests in a career department. A lot of people look at that person and go, well, they're a failure, they're lazy. Well, no, maybe that's what they really enjoy doing. And it's rebelling against, well, what's the next step I have to take? I have to go make more money, or as a volunteer, I have to spend this amount of time there. You have to redo this all the time in your life. It's not just, hey, I went through this traumatic experience and I have to come through it. That's why I love your statement, because it's throughout your life. It's all of the above. Because listen, you hit on a very hot topic. We have for a long time looked at females the wrong way in the fire service. You are expected to fit a mold, one of two molds really, in the fire service. Either you're weak, and you're not doing it, or you are over the top, and there's all kinds of little idiosyncrasies within. And I've seen even in my department, we've become more conscientious about how do we get out of that mold. First of all, how do we hire more females into our fire service? How do we recruit them appropriately? How do we bring people in who are able to do the job and ready to push them forward, help them become leaders in our department? Not just, oh, you're adequate at this. No, you are someone who can lead this department and lead us down the. That's just one piece of a fire service. We've talked. My friend Brandon came on here recently, and my other friend Vince, who are both black firefighters, and I talked about the expectation of a black firefighter. And when you step up and speak up, whoa, you're stepping outside of where you're supposed to be. And it's like, whoa. I learned a lot about that, but that's all of us have molds we've been put into. How do we break out of those molds and accomplish what we want to and need to accomplish?
Right, because I mean, the fire service is a microcosm of our society. And what our society does is put people in boxes. You grew up this way, so you're going to be this way. Your parents did this, you're going to be this way. You have this job, you have this house, you present yourself this way, so you must be this way. That's what our society does. And so it's up to us to be really, really, really brave and say, actually, no, I'm going to do this, or I'm going to accomplish this. And I mean, especially for women, I mean, that's a whole other topic of just the boxes that we're put into constantly from society's expectations. And I mean, of course, in the fire service, I've experienced so much of that, but even in business, how much I've experienced, this is the best example ever. I was doing a presentation to all the leadership in a department about on the job and off, and I was readying like the conference table, putting, folders and papers out, and there's a giant PowerPoint projection right behind me that said, Ali Rothrock, CEO. And the only person in the room at that point said, so is this your husband's company? And I thought she was kidding. And I looked to make sure like that was up. And I said, no, why do you ask? And she said, oh, I just figured. And I was like, okay, so that's a box, right? That's an expectation. So it's everywhere in our society, and it's up to us to constantly rebel against whatever those expectations are that don't fit with us.
Well, and I know that Forrest really is the puppet master. I mean, I've seen that guy. I know that guy. He's awesome. So let's be honest. He really is. He really is the engine, right? No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, he's the brain behind the law. No.
Forrest is your husband, and he is somebody also that I've watched through his process and going into the fire service and doing what he's doing. I mean, he has accomplished a lot because he's watching and assisting you all the time with all the stuff you're doing. And then he's also a full-time firefighter. And so I've watched him and his growth. How long has he been on the service?
So he started when he was 16, just like me, but he's been a career firefighter for about 5 years. And
so he's up in Pennsylvania. So I know we've talked before as well, and just watching him and his physical journey and staying fit and pushing himself beyond his limits. And that's why he and my wife get along so well, because they just love doing that stuff. So I think they're both crazy. Yeah. But even his story and even his ability to go beyond shows that resiliency as well. And it's a whole different path than you're on. I think that's the other thing too, is we don't have to go, well, Ali's resilient, so I'm going to go do what Ali does. Now, I do want to do a TED Talk, so you're going to get me into the TED Talk thing at some point. Sure. But I don't have to do everything you're doing. And I think to be able to express to people, it's finding your path. I know in my job, my role is actually I run all of our professional development for my department. We have a very large department, 1,500 people. And so part of my job is taking new people and going, what do you want to do in this fire service? Well, I want to be a chief. Okay, are you saying that because everybody says you should be a fire chief, or do you really want to be? Well, I kind of like driving the engine, and I'm more mechanical. Well, then let's get you down that path. And maybe chief is where you're at one day, but let's start you there. It's helping people find and define what their roles are going to be and what they want them to be, like you said, outside the box. So maybe share a little bit about, I don't know if you have anything about Forrest and how that's worked with him.
I mean, I think that's the whole thing about really owning your space in this world is being flexible enough to, number one, say my resilience or my path doesn't have to look like anyone else's path. Even, I have lots and lots of women who identify as sexual assault survivors, and they say, and they think, well, I can't tell my story in front of people. You don't have to do that. for your healing and your survivorship to be completely valid. So my path doesn't have to look like your path, and vice versa. And I think that's also true when it comes to, you know, your professional life and your career. I joined the fire service when I was 16, and I thought my life goal is to become a career firefighter. That's what I want to do for my whole life. Now, my whole life is going to be involved with career firefighters, but it's going to be through this new way. And so I had to kind of, you know, I started on this path that I thought toward professional firefighting, and kind of every step just kind of was leading me a little bit this way to on the job and off. And so being able to be flexible and saying, okay, my dream is actually changing a little bit because of these other experiences that I'm having. I can allow that to change because I'm going to do something, you know, better for me. And that's okay. You know, I do a lot of talks to college kids in non-pandemic times, either through creative writing classes or anything like that. And I'm really like, it's important to me of that message that if you start on a path, you can change it. And I know, you know, when you're in college, there's parents and tuition and all of these things, but you can allow yourself to change career paths as you get more information about what you want to do. And so I think, you know, that's something that I've done a ton of times, that my husband has done, that I have a lot of great friends that are just like, you know, I'm doing this, but I actually think maybe it's 1 degree off, or maybe it's a complete 180 and they want to go do something else. You're allowed to do all of that. And that's again about rebelling against that expectation that once you start with something, that can only be the one thing that you choose. That's not true at all.
Yeah, it's very true. And I think one of the things we talk about a lot in mental health is if you're a firefighter, you're a first responder, you're military personnel, and you get into this and you say, this is going to be my career. You just mentioned it about career firefighting. Those who get into career firefighting and start to get into, okay, I'm working towards a retirement and a pension, and this driver, and then the paramedic, and then the lieutenant, and then the captain, and the chief, and whatever your roles are there. And eventually I'm going to be doing this, and I have a 25-year career, I have a 30-year career, I work for a city department, it's 22, whatever. Everybody knows what all of their stuff is at their department and what your pension is, and what, okay, and they look and go, well, right now I could go over to this department and get this, and you plan it out. Well, life happens. You just said, and for, you know, you're talking about the fact that I'm heading down this straight path, and all of a sudden there's these little right steps off, or to the left, or back to center, whatever. There is no shame in a firefighter saying, I'm not going to be a firefighter anymore. There is no shame in a cop saying, I'm not going to be a cop anymore. There's no shame in a military personnel saying, I'm not going to be, and a healthcare worker, and. Because there may come a point where you go, this isn't for me. And it's not just about mental health. Let me make sure we're clear.
Yeah.
Mental health is part of it. And I know one of the people you and I both respect a ton is Dustin Hawkins. And he shares the story about his trauma and the acute stress that he faced, but also the fact that there was a guy on the call that day when he faced his trauma and got burned. But there was another guy on the call, and I believe it was his first or second day on the job, and never worked again. He said, this isn't for me. Hey, that's sad, but let me tell you, at least he knows, and at least he's healthy enough to say, this isn't, instead of going, let me stuff this down, and I'm going to figure it out. The same point, what about the person who gets it 10 years into their job and their career and goes, man, my family has changed significantly. Money has changed significantly. Our financial situation, an elderly person needs help in our family. We've had people in our department who've left, walked away from the job and gone to do something completely different in another state because it works for their family better. You have to make a decision for you. You can't look and go, well, if I don't accomplish the full career and pension, I'm a failure. We have to be able to say, let me evaluate what's taking place in my life and make the decisions. And I know even for me, within this career, there have been multiple things I've thought about doing, wanted to do. Oh, this is where I'm gonna be. And I realized 5 or 6 different times, no, that's gonna change. It's changed, and I adjust to it. And we have conversations about it. You make sure your family's a part of it. All of those things are very, very important. So it's key for you to know yourself and to ask questions, because that's the other thing. I think asking questions and getting advice outside of there is what really helps us. And what I want you to talk about now, if it's okay, is I'd love for you to share how on the job and off is really, and I know I'm kind of giving you an opportunity to promote your company, but basically what you do and what you offer is just so unique. And I think a lot of people just don't understand it, because if you're in a career fire service, your department says, well, we have a $25,000 budget for this, or we have a $100,000 budget for this, or a $5,000. whatever it is. And if you're in a small career department or a volunteer department, there isn't that access to funds to get training, to get all that stuff. And what you offer is something that's just so unique. And I know your heart, and I know that you're like, I don't really care if I make any money. And I've given you a little bit of business advice a couple times and going, listen, you can't charge people $2 for that class. Like, you have to actually make your money back, because you're such a sweet person who wants to help. But I would love for you to talk about what you offer, just because there's so many people that don't understand that there are a lot of firefighters out there who just don't have access to the training they need, whether it be basic training or even mental health awareness, resiliency type training. So just talk about that a little bit.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, I think in my professional world now, I work with a lot of career departments, big, small, everywhere in between, who they have EAPs. Regardless of whether or not they're sufficient, they're there. You know, they have money in the training budget for certain things, but I come from the volunteer world where there are no EAPs. No one is insured for mental health help. There's no mental health training. There's no money for any of that. And so, you know, 2 years ago, when the beginnings of On the Job and Off were happening, I was really just kind of taking stock of the state of all of that, career versus volunteer, what resources are there, let alone people's willingness to acknowledge mental health as a needed thing to talk about. I mean, you want to talk about stigma, I can talk to you about some conversations, and I mean, it's not a surprise to you or probably anybody else, of firefighters or leadership or commissioners or people who just think this is not a thing. It's not a thing here. We don't need to put any time or effort into talking about mental health. So I was really taking stock of all of that. And you know, I published my first book in 2010, and I mean, talk about changing life paths. Like, I was getting my fire science degree to become a career firefighter. I wrote this book kind of on accident and had to take a really big, brave step to say, I'm not going to continue on and get another degree. I'm going to move home and figure out how to publish this book. And that's what's led me to where I am now. But through speaking and sharing my story, it morphed into this educational piece on how to be more proactive about addressing, you know, the mental health needs of all of us, both on the job and off, which is where that name came from. So I was just kind of taking stock of all of this, and we started the company in July of 2018. So I was at FDIC that year in April, and I was, you know, taking a bunch of the behavioral health classes, you know, sat in on your class and was just reflecting on my own experiences that I've heard from other first responders, because as soon as you start to share your story, you're going to get a lot of stories told back to you. And I have heard hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of stories that are similar to mine in terms of women experiencing trauma at the hands of their fellow firefighters, let alone, I mean, that's one facet, and then just the untreated mental health needs of the fire service in general. So I was taking stock of all of this, and I remember, you know, being at FDIC in the hustle and bustle and busyness of that whole week, and I sat down in the middle of one of those long hallways with all the booths. I found a spot, I sat my back against the wall, and I just started writing the outline of what would become Capturing the Load, which is the very first course that we put up on the Job and Off. And I was getting to the point where I was having so many requests for me to come speak that I couldn't keep up with all of them. I was still working a full-time job at that time, working for a mental health nonprofit in Philly, and I just couldn't keep up with everything. And I, you know, was kind of lamenting to one of my friends about this, and you know, the idea came to put a class, you know, make a class, put the very best ways that I know how to talk about this stuff and put it online and just see if it works, that way. Because I can think a class is great. If it's not doing anything for anyone else, then we're not going to do it. So started On the Job and Off, knew that we were going to make it, like I said, as accessible as possible. So we knew that it was going to be primarily based online. I'm sure you've seen this with mental health stuff. Like, I've had people at conferences, you know, walk into my classroom, have a friend be passing in the hall and be like, you're not going into that mental health thing, are you? And then they walk right back out. So there's so much stigma of just sitting in a room learning about this stuff, let alone if people are made to be sitting there, they're going to be distracting each other and talking, because the more personal and relevant it feels, the more they're going to be squirming. And so I thought, if we can figure out a way to put the classes right here or on someone's laptop where they can put in headphones and it's just me and them and no one has to know what they're learning about or listening to. That would be a way to really access people. And let alone, like, I do a lot of state chiefs conferences. By nature of that, sitting in front of me are a lot of chiefs. And that's great because we need buy-in from the top, but the content isn't reaching the boots on the ground firefighters. And so, you know, creating On the Job and Off was the biggest thing that I had ever done professionally. And we put up this first course called Capturing the Load, which is like a 1-hour basic mental health awareness stuff for firefighters. So it's not talking over anybody's heads. It's just a firefighter to a firefighter talking about these things. And we were so fortunate to find a national partner right out of the gate with the NVFC, the National Volunteer Fire Council, and we partnered with them to offer Capturing the Load to 1,000 first responders at no cost to the first responders. And it was this beautiful opportunity to get this course in front of people and to get their feedback on it. Because like I said, I wanted to know, is this working? Is this moving the needle on your education at all? Is it moving the needle on your willingness to get help if you need it, to have different conversations around your firehouse? And so what we found with those 1,000 people, we got firefighters from every single state. We found that 1, the course was working. It was doing what we wanted it to do. And 2, we were asking people in the feedback, what else do you want from us? If this works, what else can we provide? And so through about the next year, we created 5 additional classes on those most requested topics. So we have so it's Capturing the Load is like our basic like awareness level starting point. Then we have an additional course on vicarious trauma. We have compassion fatigue, cumulative stress, and then we have a big course on overcoming addiction, both as a first responder if you're dealing with it and dealing with overdose after overdose after overdose in the opioid crisis. And then we also put up a course called The Way Forward, which we just partnered with the NVFC on again, which was the most requested topic for me. And it was about, you know, addressing these questions. Like, I get asked 4 questions constantly, and it is, how do we get more women to join the fire service? Why don't they stay when they do join? How do we end sexual harassment? How do we end sexual violence? And those 4 questions have a really similar answer, but it's not a simple one. And I really took my time with that course because I knew that in order to make that course different than all the other, I'm going to take this course to check a box and now we all know about sexual harassment courses, in order to make it different, it needed to be very direct, but not in a way that was going to make people divisive. And that's a really tricky line to walk. I'm pretty practiced at doing it in person, but when it's me and someone else on the other side of a computer screen and we're not interacting, it's just a tough line to walk. And so, you know, we launched, like I said, the company in 2018. We relaunched as an annual membership platform 1 year later because we wanted to make it easy so first responders didn't have to go on and like, I want this course, so I'm going to pay for it in this course. It's just a one flat fee for 365 days. You get every course that's up there. So we are so fortunate to have additional amazing instructors on there now. We just launched a course on grief for first responders. You, Jeremy, provide wonderful content for our blog, and we have lots more cool things coming. But I mean, the whole goal for On the Job and Off was to make, you know, mental health and resiliency and anti-violence content that was really easily accessible. And I feel like we've been able to do that with the platform that we have. And we also, the very last talk that I did before the pandemic shut us all down was in Orlando for the Department of Defense. And that was a really cool opportunity because I was able to partner with them to provide our resources for firefighters and dispatchers on military bases. And so that's a fantastic avenue that I didn't really think of when I first started this, but I think it just goes to show, you know, that the courses are working, and, you know, that's evidenced by how many people are on taking them. And right now we are working on a massive initiative that I'm not going to talk about just yet, but it's going to be the biggest thing that On the Job and Off has ever done. And we're positioned so perfectly to do that with the platform that we have now.
Great. And I think the other thing we want we want people to understand is that you do such a great job with that. And your conversation with the Department of Defense was hilarious because you said to me, you were like, listen to this, Jeremy. They want me to come down and talk to military personnel. Like we're gonna talk to military personnel. Like I'm like, what? And so we kind of had this conversation where we're trying to figure out what that was going to look like, and just how successful that was huge. But I think what you talked about there is the content you brought up is content that a lot of departments don't use, because they do their basic training, they cover ropes and knots, they cover their fire stuff, and they may cover some basic mental health, but you're getting into some specific topics because of your experience. And I think that's huge. That's huge because it allows people to see something differently. They get to see it from a different perspective. They get to understand it from a one-on-one person who's been through it.
And I think like sometimes I kind of get like the eye roll reaction from chiefs being like, we have 1,000 things we have to train on and all this Con Ed and stuff we have to redo year over year. And those are people who don't understand the significance of mental health yet. But that's why this platform, I think, works, is because there are so many boxes that we have to constantly be checking of, Con Ed, and did you redo this? And did you get your update on this? And all of that is so much, and that takes so much time. And so my goal with this was to make it so it's way less logistics on everybody. You don't have to sit everybody into a room. The chief doesn't have to coordinate anything. It's just you give everybody access, and then they can go on at any time of the day or night and get the certificate that comes with each course, and it's just easier logistically.
Right. All right. Well, I gave you your time to promote your company. So no, but you're doing such a good job with that, and the content is something so unique. Tell us a little bit about how you came to write books, like because you talked about, okay, I was going to get degrees, and you decided to write these books, and a little bit about the content, because I know I've shared them with some friends, and it's been life-changing for a couple of them who have seen some differences in how, first of all, harassment is viewed, how and how we become resilient as a result of the things we face.
Absolutely, yeah. So, 6th grade Ali, she wanted to be a writer. That was my goal. Like, you want to be an ice skater or a hairdresser. Like, I just wanted to be a writer. But I think it was quite divine if I look back at the timing of everything, how, I started firefighting in October of 2005, and in September of 2005, I just randomly picked up this habit of writing in a journal every day. And I think that was just, someone looking out saying, you are going to need a pretty significant coping skill here pretty directly. And so we're going to put this one into your life that's already a habit. So right now, if you can see this number here, that's journal number 90. I write every single day, and I have a bookcase that's just full of full journals. I don't know what I'm ever going to do with them. But when I left my first volunteer firehouse, carrying all of the trauma that had happened to me there, I had about 25 journals that I had filled in that first 3-year chunk of my very first fire service experience. And I went away to college to get my fire science degree. I was, packing up my room, and I very consciously did not bring those journals with me because I wanted to very literally leave that story, leave those experiences behind. I just didn't want to deal with them. I didn't want to acknowledge them. And one of my parents, I don't know which one it was, saw that I was leaving that, box of journals behind and put it in the car to come with me to college. And so when I was getting ready in my new room, I saw that box of journals there. And I just kind of stared at it for a while because, I was so fresh from all of this trauma, but also felt like I had lived 1,000 lives in kind of the last 3 years. And so I picked up the very first journal that, had my very first day as a firefighter in it. And I sat down at my brand new laptop that I got for college and just started kind of flipping through that journal, remembering my first fire call, my first time in fire gear, all of that, and just kind of was retyping those memories in a Word document. And just that simple act of doing that, up until that point, I had been carrying this weight with me of these experiences, and it really felt like a heavy winter coat that I just could not take off. It was with me always. It was hot and stifling and cumbersome and distracting. And through typing that first little day out, it felt like I unzipped that coat a little bit, like that act of reflecting, that act of just a couple years difference and perspective was just helpful. It was therapeutic before I knew what any of that was. And so that act of being able to zip that weight off a little bit was so relieving that that's what I did for my first, couple years of college. Was I was just poring over those journals, pulling out the most significant moments and rewriting them for myself, because I thought it was going to help me and the stuff that I was struggling with. And somewhere along the way, I looked at what I was writing and I realized that it wasn't just a book about a girl in a firehouse, which very, very few people can relate to. But it was about, rebelling against these expectations. It was about falling in love with something and having that thing tell you, we don't want you the way that you are. You need to change for us. And what happens if you say no to that? It was really about finding forgiveness in these people and in this entire, in the entire fire service. It was about, this journey of redemption. And I remember very distinctly the day that, I was filling out paperwork to go on to get my next degree after my fire science degree was over. And, it was not that far away from when I was supposed to do that. And I was talking to my sister and I just said, I think I want to try to publish this book. I don't want to go and get that next degree. I think I want to figure out how to publish this book. And my sister, being awesome, was like, I think you should do that. I think you should 100% do that. And that was all the kind of little validation that I needed. So I moved home and I worked a bunch of jobs, Starbucks, waitressing, everything, to get enough money to self-publish my first book. And I had gone the traditional route of publishing, but people wanted to change it in ways that would make it untrue. They just wanted to change it in ways that would change the authenticity of the story. So I decided to self-publish. So, looking back at Where Hope Lives, I wrote that story because that was how I was going to survive it. That was how I was going to survive those experiences and move on with my life. 10 years after Where Hope Lives, so I published that in 2010, so 10 years now, I am just about finished with my second book called After, which was written much more intentionally and purposefully versus Where Hope Lives, which was just very much like, I need this out in this way. After is a very, deliberate project that I'm currently editing with my editor as we speak. So writing Where Hope Lives was an accident. It wasn't anything that I set out to do, but as soon as I realized what it was, I became very, focused on making that into a book that other people could read, because I thought if I had this story when I was struggling, I wouldn't have felt so alone. And I think that's half the battle to overcoming something. It's just letting someone else be in it with you. And so writing books was, sixth grade Ali wanted to do that, but sixth graders want to do a lot of things. When I was 21, Where Hope Lives was published, and I'm 31 now. So, a decade later, After will be coming soon. And then I have lots more writing projects in the works that will be a bit of a departure from what people are used to for me. But yeah, I'm really happy to have that kind of creative avenue in my life.
Well, and so you have 90 journals that are full. I have 3 that are empty, because I have 3 that have like 2 pages that I'm going to journal. And this is over like the last 20 years of my life. I'm like, I'm going to journal. I'm going to journal the whole page. And I know when Christy and I got married last summer, I was like, I'm going to start a journal on after our wedding. And I think I did 2 weeks. Yeah. It's somewhere. And so it kind of brings up that point we talk about a lot in this mental health world, which is writing became more than just a coping skill for you. It was a lifeline. It was a way for you to really deal with what you were facing. And I think I want people to remember, you have to be intentional about this. And maybe it is going back to 6th grade Mark or 6th grade John or 6th grade Jeremy, and think about what it was that kind of got you excited and look forward in the world. Or maybe it's what's happened in your life since then. And so you have to be very intentional about that. But there is something to be said for, even if you're not a writer, for writing things down. There is something to be said for putting it on paper. I know a lot of psychologists, psychiatrists, counselors will do this and say, hey, write a letter to yourself. Write a letter that nobody's ever gonna read, to someone else. Or there's a lot of these things that there's a reason why we do it, because it stops us. I know, even I'm studying for our Chiefs test right now, and even taking notes from a book and highlighting them and writing them, you're seeing it differently. You're like, oh wait, that's important enough for me to write down. That's not. It starts to pull things out, and then I'm reading my own writing, and I've changed the words a little bit. I put something into a fragment that was a full sentence, and I'm like, this person does this, and that's and so
and something a point I always really want to make is like, okay, so I wrote Where Hope Lives. I'll show you. This is the manuscript for after, so it's thick. It's a big one, but the majority of the words that I've ever written will never be read by anybody else. So the validity of what you write isn't found in whether other people read it or not. So I know people get caught up in, I want a journal, but like, it doesn't have to be for anybody else. It doesn't have to be grammatically correct. It doesn't have to be neat. It doesn't, have to be in sentences. Just write your brain out, because you see it so much differently. And there are so many times when I'm like struggling with something, or even in writing, trying to arrive at a point that I'm trying to make. And if I can't figure it out, I'll just free write. And maybe like a page in, I'll be like, that's what I was trying to say. There it is. So there's so much value in writing, even if no one else ever reads it.
I love that. I love that concept. And how many pictures are going to be in the next book?
In after. I'll make a picture version just for you.
Yeah, I really need, if I can just have a pictograph version that I could just like flip through, maybe a scratch and sniff portion or something. For firefighters who aren't as bright as you. And I kind of wanted to, I want to make sure we talk a little bit more about how people can intentionally be resilient, because I know this is kind of what we're talking about here. We're giving you some ideas about some things to think about, some concepts regarding coping skills, some, the idea before about it's an act of rebellion, but how do we intentionally, the word resiliency brings to mind bouncing back, right? And we talk about, it's that idea of something happens that's bad and we bring something positive out of it. And I always want to make sure I'm clear on the fact that it doesn't mean that bad stuff just has to be ignored. I know that Dina Ali is somebody we've talked to in North Carolina who we both love and respect, and she used to hate the fact that I would use the word resiliency. She's like, wait, what you're saying is you don't have to be upset about anything. I'm like, no. I think that we have to make sure we acknowledge the bad thing that took place. We take it in. We go through maybe the stages of grief, depending on what's going on. We might cycle through those. We might face a little bit of denial of the results of it, or we might get to acceptance very quickly. But the result of bad stuff, let's put it that way, when handled correctly, can be positive. Doesn't mean it's always going to be. I know that there are families that I've dealt with in my 20 plus years of doing this as a pastor, as a teacher, as a chaplain, and many different roles, where I know people who over 20 years ago have lost a child, and every time I see them, I can still see the hurt and the pain. Doesn't mean that that's not going to exist.
Right.
But what it means is, how do you find positive out of the negative? For me anyway, and I'd love for you to kind of talk about just what it really looks like to acknowledge what takes place that's bad. And for many of our first responders who are listening right now, it's that bad call. It's that really, really bad incident. It's the double fatality. It's the whatever call you ran. And it might just be randomly coming up. And for me, just yesterday, I was at work, and an individual from our airport fire station came walking in, and he's brand new to the station. He just moved over to that station, and he's learning the airport. Well, in our process here, when you're learning the airport, it's a 5 to 8 month testing process, because there's at an international airport, there's so much that goes on. And we were kind of laughing and joking. I said, I remember when I learned this. I remember how many keys you're carrying and all the things you learn. And then in the process of talking, right then, my worst call ever came back to my mind. I haven't thought about it in forever, but my worst call ever happened at the airport. It was a fatality in a plane crash, which just the worst possible things you can imagine. I was sharing some of the story of what took place, and afterwards I went back in my office and I went, wow. It wasn't horrible, but it was a little punch in the gut, and I went, oh, I haven't dealt with that in years, and I've been fine from it, but I remember thinking, wow, all of a sudden the smells, the sights, the memories all come back. Well, resiliency isn't going, I'm never going to remember that again. Resiliency is, I can remember it, and instead of it overwhelming me like it did back then, which it did for a few weeks, how do I get to that point? So if you can talk about that a little bit from your perspective, I think that will help some of our listeners understand what this really looks like and feels like.
Yes. Yeah. So yeah, that's a great point. I'm glad you said that. So resiliency does not mean that we are ignoring our feelings, that we are dismissing our feelings, that we are invalidating our feelings. Resiliency means that it's important to feel and acknowledge all of that, everything that comes with whatever type of adversity we're dealing with. But resiliency means those feelings is not where you stop. Those feelings are not where you end your relationship to that experience. So maybe it is that one bad call, or maybe it's a medium bad call that was the 100th drip in your bucket that now you're just like, I'm done. Or maybe you have stuff at home and stuff with your parents and stuff here and stuff there, and you're just at a point where you have that one call and it just like you're a rubber band that snaps and you need help. Resiliency, or I guess not being not resilient in that moment, would look like not doing anything to change how you're reacting. It would look like you're just mad at everybody, yelling at everybody. You might walk away from your job. You might, keep yelling at your kids. You're using unhealthy coping. That's what not choosing resiliency looks like. And sometimes we do that for a while and it happens. But again, you can wake up the next day and say, okay, I'm going to choose to not be stuck there anymore. I'm going to choose to do a different thing. And maybe the first step towards being resilient looks like going to a friend that you have in the fire service or not, and just putting words to your experience, what you're going through. You don't have to have all the clinical terms. You don't have to know what something is called. You don't have to know if you have PTSD or not. None of that is your job to figure out. Your job in being resilient, what actively choosing resilience looks like, is not getting stuck in the bad place and choosing that today I am going to take one step to be resilient. I am going to ask a friend for coffee, or I'm going to walk into my chief's office and say that I need to talk, or I'm going to look up what insurances my department covers, or what clinicians my department insurance covers. I'm going to talk to a friend. I'm going to talk to my spouse. That's what being resilient looks like, because it has to be intentional. Because if you do nothing, you will be stuck. You will stay where you are, because those things are self-fulfilling prophecies. The more that you use negative coping skills, the more that you get stuck in that place in your head, the harder that it is to get out of it. And so it has to be intentional. And, like I said in the beginning, I've practiced being resilient so many times. I mean, when I was in that stuck, sunk place, I didn't think that I would ever be able to be mentally well. It just didn't seem feasible, because the PTSD that I was experiencing was so bad. I didn't even know what that was called. I didn't even know that I had it. It didn't seem feasible that my life could look any different. But my very first act of, resiliency in that experience was texting a family friend who was a counselor and telling her that I needed help. That was it. And because she's wonderful, and God bless me with knowing her, I was in her office the next day, talking to her, learning that I had PTSD, and starting that recovery process. But only I could do that. Only I could decide, I'm done with this. I'm tired of being here. I want to do something else. And it's hard when we see loved ones struggling. We want to do these things for them. We want to take their hand and walk them to therapy. We want to take their hand and drop them off at, drug rehab. We want to do these things for them. But we can't. It has to be something that they choose. And that's a really, really, really hard thing. But, you can physically place someone in front of a therapist, but if they're not ready to be there, they're not going to engage. They're not going to be open in any sort of way that's helpful for them. So we all have our own moments of arriving, deciding that we want to be resilient, but it really looks like taking those intentional steps to not be stuck where you were.
And I love that. I love how you said that. And I'd love for you to also touch on the fact that PTSD is not a death sentence. I think a lot of people think, well, once I get PTSD, because first of all, it's a buzzword that everybody's freaked out about. So we have some people worried about, well, we're going to have people use the term PTSD to get themselves out of work and long-term disability, et cetera, with all the state bills that have passed. We also have people who are saying, well, nobody has PTSD. It's kind of like COVID. Everybody has it or nobody has it, because it depends on what side of the political spectrum you find yourself on. It's the same thing with PTSD. We have people who get in this one and go, everybody has PTSD. We have to figure out why, because every firefighter is going to have PTSD, and every firefighter is going to have suicidal tendencies. Then you have other people who go, it doesn't exist, it's not real. I would love for you to share kind of the same thing that Dustin has shared about the fact that PTSD is real, and it can happen when you have a significant issue, but it is not something that you are going, it's something you have to deal with the rest of your life, but it's not something that's going to negatively affect you the rest of your life, because you can have that resiliency to overcome it. So if you can share a little bit about how PTSD was, yes, a diagnosis, a real legitimate diagnosis for you, not a buzzword, and how you walked to a point where you're now writing books and sharing and talking, and your whole life doesn't revolve around PTSD.
That's right. Yep. So I think a lot of times when, I'll have first responders that reach out and, they say, I ran a really bad call yesterday. I did not sleep last night. I have PTSD. And in a lot of situations, what they're actually talking about is post-traumatic stress symptoms, not post-traumatic stress disorder, which is a whole other thing. Every single emergency responder has experienced post-traumatic stress symptoms more than once. That just looks like, the day, a couple days after a call, you're really distracted by it. Maybe you have dreams about it. You're just really focused on it. Those are post-traumatic stress symptoms, and that is incredibly normal and healthy. Most people never, don't progress to PTSD if they can, our bodies are really good at keeping that baseline, and they'll do everything they have to do to process it, and then it'll be just like another call that we've run. So post-traumatic stress symptoms and post-traumatic stress disorder are very, very different. And you're absolutely right. People have that buzzword. They use PTSD like a blanket term, which is incorrect. It invalidates those of us that actually do have that diagnosis. And it makes everyone afraid that if they had one dream about a bad call, they have PTSD. So two very different things. And yeah, for me, my PTSD diagnosis came in 2012, years after it was warranted. But I'm very stubborn, like a lot of first responders, and I just thought, I will wake up tomorrow and this will be better. I am so strong-willed that I can just will myself to no longer be dealing with all of the PTSD symptoms that I'm dealing with, as if that's ever how it worked. But I was afraid of help. I was afraid of talking to someone. I was afraid of the label. I was afraid of a therapist saying, I can't help you. Or someone saying, I don't know what's wrong with you. I think those are my biggest fears. And I can't accurately put into words the relief I felt when I sat in front of my first therapist, Jill, and Lord knows what I told her, back then. But I said as much as I was on my mind presently. I'm not sleeping, I'm not eating, I'm having, flashbacks all the time. I'm at 10 out of 10 stress levels constantly. I'm so scared. I can't, be in my firehouse. And I just kind of blabbed all this to her. And the very first thing she said was, that makes sense. That makes sense. And I was like, it does? Because it doesn't make sense to me.
It doesn't make sense to anybody else.
Right. And that relief of, that's the benefit of having like an unbiased, educated, not emotionally invested person hear what you're dealing with, is because they have that outside objective perspective that we'll never be able to have on ourselves.
Yeah.
So like when I speak and I talk about the symptoms that I was having and the way that I was seeing the world, I acknowledge before I say that, like, you're going to think like, Ali, that's really super unhealthy way to live. And you're right. But I did not see that at the time. I was just trying to survive and to get through the next 5 minutes. And so, when she told me that I had PTSD, first of all, I told her that she was wrong, because only soldiers have that stigma.
Yep.
Couldn't be me. So basically, try again. That can't be what I have. And I think my exact words were, people who go to war have that. And she said, well, I think it depends on your definition of war, because I think what you've gone through, you've been fighting a battle by yourself for years and years and years. And then she explained PTSD as a physical injury. It was a physical difference in my brain, versus her brain. And she said it was if you know, your experiences, and it was if those firefighters took a baseball bat to your leg and broke it. That's how physical this injury is. It's just here and you can't see it. And she said, you are trying to run on your broken leg as if that's what's going to fix it. You are just trying to muscle through your life and just force this healing. And that's not how healing anything works. And so having that diagnosis at the time, I mean, it was sad because we don't want to have anything wrong with us, even though I knew there was something wrong. But I really found a lot of validation in that diagnosis, that what I was going through was not something that I was making up. It wasn't something that she didn't know what to do with. It was something that, you know, she had the DSM open, which is where all the mental health diagnoses are, and she showed me, this is what you have, and all of the qualities of what PTSD is, and it blew my brain apart because that information was available to me, that help was available to me. I didn't have to struggle by myself for as long as I did because I was just busy being stubborn and busy just being a self-sufficient firefighter, which is what we're taught to do. Just show up, solve a problem, that's your job. We can't solve our own problems all the time. No one, you know, I don't know where we got this message that we have to. And so, you know, having that diagnosis, like I said, came in 2012. And I really think it wasn't until 2016 until I got married and moved away from the town where most of my trauma happened. I think I had done all of the healing that I could do while still seeing the people that hurt me. It wasn't until I left town that I finally experienced this freedom, because I had done all of the work. I had done all the therapeutic work and work on myself to unlearn the things that I had learned to be afraid of. You know, something as simple as when I experienced the sexual assault that I did, it was nighttime and it was raining. So being at the firehouse at night was really hard for me. If it was raining and nighttime, forget about it. And I remember like sitting in my car at my house, knowing there was a call I wanted to go to, and I just could not make myself go to the firehouse because it was nighttime and raining. So I had to unlearn to be afraid of that. And that took time, but I did as much as I could in that town. And it wasn't until 2016 did I really consider myself like free of all symptoms. So that's, you know, 4 years of work, of deliberately choosing that I don't want that. I don't want to be stuck here forever. And when I first learned that I had PTSD, I started reading a ton of books. I mean, I have just books everywhere in my office on people who had PTSD and lived to the other side of it. Because back then, PTSD was like the #1 way that I defined myself. It was how I identified myself. It was the biggest part of me. And now having PTSD is like the millionth way I define myself. It's not a part of my experience anymore. But there's really something to be said about seeing people who have gotten to the other side, where they're not dealing with the nightmares, they're not dealing with all these things anymore, to know that it is possible. And then after, you know, the subtitle for that is Stories of Overcoming and Becoming. So it's my journey to where I am now, but I included other people's stories, you know, that I'd interviewed who had gone through significant trauma, and what their after looked like. How did they become the person that overcame the things that they had experienced? So PTSD is real. It's very real. It's not the same thing as post-traumatic stress symptoms. If you have a dream about a call, do not freak yourself out. It's normal and healthy to be processing things that way. But you know, every time I stand on a stage, which I guess I'm technically doing now, it's just very different with the pandemic. I think, you know, I can say all the words about trauma recovery, but getting up and telling the story and being up in front of firefighters and being up in front of people who I don't know and sharing the story does so much more just by the act of doing it, by being up there and saying, I can share these things and the ground is not going to open up and swallow me. The world is going to continue to spin just because I'm sharing these things. And I hear from people that just seeing me do that made them feel like, oh, I can go to therapy and talk about this and my life's not going to end, or I can tell my boss or my spouse or whoever, just the act of doing it. And so I hope to be that example for people, because I get that inspiration and example from seeing so many people do that same thing.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a great point. First of all, I love the bravery. We love you. We appreciate your friendship with our family as well. My wife and daughter get to sit here in the room and listen to you share your story too. It's just kind of fun. They keep smiling behind the camera. But one of the things besides the bravery is acknowledging the issue, because you mentioned part of the issue for us as firefighters is we are fixers. I just talked to a firefighter yesterday who family members are, there's a family member there probably that's about to pass away, and there's nothing they can do about it. And he called me last night and he said, and I'm not giving any details because this chaplain, I'm trying to be polite to that, but he called me out of the blue and he said, listen, he goes, I'm getting ready to walk into my house and they expect me to be firefighter so-and-so. They expect me to, and he goes, I don't know what to do. And so can I get some advice on what to say? And so I asked some questions about what the situation was and found out some details. And I said, okay, well, here's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to be you. And he goes, what do you mean? I go, you're supposed to go in there and cry. You're supposed to go in there and lose it about the fact that you're about to lose a loved one. And it's okay. You don't have to have the answers. I said, they don't expect you to be firefighter so-and-so. They expect you to be their son, their grandson, that's it. And I said, go in there and celebrate the legacy, because you haven't lost this person yet, but we know based on our understanding of medical issues, this person is probably going to die in the next 24 hours. We know that. Be honest with them. I think they probably know too, but so being able to be broken, being able to, and I talked to him, I said, that's part of it. Number two, we talk about the ministry of presence. I said, part of it is you're going to be there. So just love on them, hug them, cry with them. It's okay. And I said, then number three, admit the fact that you may have to go talk to someone when this is done. As this moves forward, you may have to go have a conversation with somebody besides me. I'm not a professional. You could go talk to someone who can walk through and go, hey, here's what this looks like. Because you said there is post-traumatic stress. And every time I teach, I tell people, you are going to face trauma. You are going to face stress in this job. If you don't think you're going to, go do something else.
Yes.
If you face it, what is the coping skill? What's the plan? How do we handle it? And then once we get to a point where it moves beyond acute stress, post-traumatic stress symptoms, acute stress disorder, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, it gets into that point, because we talk about the DSM says 30 days. It's pretty much the number.
That's right.
You have to be a difficulty functioning for 30 days beyond this event. Once that happens and we're getting help along the way, yes, there might be a diagnosis. And then if it is, it doesn't mean, oh, I failed, I lost. No. Now we know there's an issue that's deeper than you can fix. Oh no, you as a firefighter can't fix it. We're sorry. Let's let somebody else help. And one of the things I faced in my department as the chaplain coming in to help with the behavioral health things is I started as a guy with a few years on the job who was just doing funerals and weddings and helping out with that stuff, and occasionally doing a fire station opening or invocation for something, whatever. And as I started to shift into realizing that we as firefighters need help beyond that, and we actually need help with the mental health side of things, of which I knew nothing at the time. And what I realized was there were a lot of people concerned about the fact that this guy who didn't have any knowledge was going to professionally try to help people. And I had to make sure we were clear. There are things we're all capable of. And I, even as a chaplain, had to realize I am not capable of walking you through a diagnosis, walking you through treatment, figuring out if you need medication, counseling, EMDR, blah, 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 blah. That's not me. Now I can learn about them and say, hey, here's somebody who does this stuff, but we have to be able to acknowledge what we do well and what we don't. I know when it comes to driver, operator functions on a fire scene, I can make sure that if I had to help, I could get water to the fire, but I am not going to know my friction loss, my pressure, my GPMs. I don't know this. I try to keep up, but I haven't done it in forever, and it's not my strength. But I also know that when we come to an EMS protocol as an EMS captain, and when it gets into the stuff that I do, the cardiac arrest, the stuff that's the high level, high end stuff, I'm on it. I know my dosages. I also know that when it comes to some of the stuff that's more of our BLS stuff that I just don't really do anymore because I'm in a level that I have to ask some questions. Hey, what's the dose we give for that? Because I haven't given that in 5 years. It's the same thing when it comes to this mental health thing. You're not expected to be an expert. You as firefighters are not expected to know what Ali knows. You as firefighters are not expected to know what I know, maybe on the faith side. You're not expected to know what your EAP coordinator would know about the different treatment options, but you do need to know where to go get help. You do need to know that there's hope on the other side of this, There
Yes.
is the ability to get better and to live a better life. There is something other than ending your life. There is something other than finishing every night on with half a bottle or whatever to get through the evening. There is hope on the other side of this, but you have to realize that you might be broken and you may need to go get help. And I love the analogy you gave about the broken leg. We talk about it all the time. When one of your firefighters walks into your station and has a broken arm and they've got it in a sling, you all know they have a broken arm, and you all know, hey, I'm not going to let you lift. You're going to do light duty. The same thing happens with the brain injury, and I call it the soul injury, the injury that hurts us emotionally. And not everybody has it. We're not saying that every firefighter has that, but there are people who've struggled with something like that. And for what you went through at the hands of firefighters as a young girl is unacceptable and just completely wrong. And for you to have an injury as a result of it is very normal. Like, you didn't have to, I'll be like, there's something wrong with her. The fact that you understand that and when got help, and the fact that it took you 4 years should be an encouragement to our first responders to say, there's hope for me. There's hope for me to be able to talk about it, to be able to go. And we're not just talking about sexual assault. We're talking about any type of call you've run. It could be a loss of it could be a family member who completed suicide. It could be any number of things that affected you to a level where you're going, I don't know how to move forward. We're in the middle of a pandemic where people are struggling at a higher level with mental and emotional trauma because they're stuck in situations that are financially hurting them. They're stuck with sometimes with family members who it's not a good situation. There's domestic issues. There's all kinds of stuff happening. So now is the time to be able to say, how do I go get the help I need? We're at a point where, and the word stigma, I don't even like using the word stigma anymore because we're getting away from that. Yeah. So let's stop using it as an excuse. Let's go get the help we need to get.
Absolutely. Yeah. And a point I just want to make sure I make is that, for those 4 years, at the end of 4 years is when I became symptom free, but I was getting better that whole time. So I don't want people to think like it's going to take 4 years to be better. Not at all. That was when I really consider myself, free of the majority of the stuff. So I was getting better the whole time. So just to make that clear, like going to therapy, getting a diagnosis, it doesn't fix it right away. It doesn't make it go away right away. But you are taking action on the belief that your life can be different, better, something else. And that makes it better.
And you and I both know that we've talked to people who literally after they realize there's an issue may have 2 or 3 sessions with a counselor and they're good. We need people who it's taken 10 years. But the point is to be able to put the work in just like you would if you had the broken leg or the broken arm and it's time to do therapy. I just found out the other day I got a torn meniscus in my knee and I'm like, okay, I got to go to the doctor tomorrow. I know I've got an appointment. I had the MRI. I'm going to the doctor because it's been sore for a while. I'm going to the doctor tomorrow. What are my options? And he's going to lay the options. And I'm going to go to another doctor next week, get a second opinion. I'm going to find out, okay, is this something I can do therapy for? Is this something I can try one of these new therapies for? Is this something I'm going to need minor surgery for? What does it look like? And then you make a decision. It's the same thing with your mental health. Yeah. There are so many professionals. Now, not everybody who says they're professional is good. Just like there's certain people who are orthopedic surgeons that I would not go see. I talk to enough people who have gone, don't see that guy, don't see that girl. They're not very, very good. Get recommendations, find out who they are. It doesn't mean that your department and their EAP is perfect. Most aren't, as you and I both know. It's the reality that we have the opportunity to seek what's out there and get the help we need.
Absolutely. Yes. Well, and that's of course
I'm sorry, is there anything else you would like to add? Because I'd love for you to be able to kind of take us home and give some great points.
Sure. Just thinking about that, not all clinicians are great, which is an unfortunate fact of life. There are people in every profession that should do something else. But, I ran into that so much with finally getting a first responder to the place where they're willing to go talk to someone, and then they sit in front of the clinician and the clinician just spends the whole hour like asking them questions about their job that they never get help and nothing ever changes. That, I really want to do something to fix that. So at On the Job and Off, we put something out called Gearing Up, which is kind of aimed at teaching clinicians about, fire, EMS, and dispatch. So they already know the culture and the emotional impacts of things before first responders get to them. But yeah, just to really make that point that going to therapy can be the thing that puts your life on a different trajectory. It really can be that thing that helps you get to where you want to be. But I always encourage people to it doesn't have to be the biggest deal in the world. It doesn't have to be this thing that you psych yourself up for and you're so worried about. It's just a conversation. And maybe you go and you realize, I don't really gel with that person. Like, I have a friend who's an older firefighter, and the first time he went to therapy, all he could think was, that girl is as old as my daughter, and I can't talk to her about anything. She was a perfectly fine therapist. It just wasn't a good fit. So we found someone that was closer to his age, that was a former police officer, and it just worked better. So don't be afraid to want to try again. And that choice of, this doesn't work, but I'm not going to force it, I'm going to find something that's a better fit, that is another way to choose resilience, because you're finding something that's actually going to help you.
Love it. Well, and just so people know, the Florida Firefighter Safety and Health Collaborative is who provides this opportunity for us to do this. And they've got a class that we started years ago called a Clinician Awareness Program, which is similar to that Gear Up. And I know we've talked about this before. Really, it's one of those things all of us want to make sure we give away, because we want our clinicians to be trained. And I know that Dustin and I really worked hard to create a program down here that's 2 to 3 days now.
Yes, it's so important.
Firefighter lingo, firefighter behavior. Dustin has created a thing called a Rosetta Stone for clinicians to be able to know what's the glossary of terms, like what are the phrases they use. So I want to make sure we tell people, that they provided this class for you and I to teach, that we're going to provide out on links as well. But also there's classes like that, clinician awareness programs, things that are available to you. I know Illinois has a program. You have one up there. We have programs everywhere that are available. Let's get our clinicians in them. Let's help our clinicians learn what it is we do, because that's the way we make some of the difference as well. I just want to thank you for being on here. You are a breath of fresh air. You have what you have come from, what you have chosen to do, and how you have chosen to help the fire service in spite of what the fire service did to you is an encouraging thing to all of us. And I know I use that as an example all the time in my classes, because you are somebody that I respect and look up to because of how you've overcome your situation, how you've become resilient, how you have made the choice to better the fire service as a whole and leaving a legacy. Thank you for joining us. It's been great.
So happy to be here. Thanks, Jeremy.
Well, thank you all for joining us. If you ever need anything, please reach out to us. The Hurd Group, Ali Rothrock, On the Job and Off, all of us would do anything we can to help you at any time. Thank you for joining us.